watching Morning at NTV.
A very good morning once again. It's fast approaching the top of the hour of 8 a.m. I know there's a lot that is going on in terms of preparations to take on the vagaries of your labors, but this is a conversation that you should not miss. Our Kickstarter, we are looking at constitutional and electoral reform proposals ahead of 2026, whether they have been undertaken or those that have actually been undertaken are fit for purpose. I'm joined by the indefatigable Miriam Matembe. She's chairperson of SEDU, a veteran politician and former Minister for Ethics and Integrity. You're most welcome, madam.
Thank you very much, but I need to correct that thing of being chairperson for SEDU.
Oh, please.
I ceased long ago.
You ceased long ago. So what are you now?
Hey.
I'm
a distinguished senior citizen in this country who has done all my work.
That is,
and I'm resting.
That's understandable. We know that. So you're now resting. No one is requiring you to wake up in the morning and advise on some very important.
Except you disturb me, you the media people. Otherwise, I'm free for God. Good morning.
We thank the Lord for you and of course the work that you're undertaking. I'm also joined by governance expert Job Kija. Many thanks for making it. It's been a long time. Does that mean you've been away from the country, or it is me that has been away from the confines of civil society?
I think the challenge with Ugandans is that we don't believe in retirement. Sometimes it's okay to retreat. So when you think Dr. Matembe should be something, yes, she's a senior citizen and she's retired.
That's right.
And I think we need to encourage Ugandans to retire.
Oh, that's a very good point indeed. Now, the 2026 general election is one that is being seen as the latest in a series of very significant political events in the country. Right now, as I speak, the ability of members of parliament and other key stakeholders when it comes to decision making to sit down and plan for this nation has been impeded because they are planning on how best to position themselves ahead of 2026. But when it comes to positioning, the aspect of constitutional and electoral reforms has been a long-standing one. I would love Kija Job to quickly take us through what is on the table, what are the contentious aspects that need to be addressed or have been addressed, but also those that are still a bone of contention, especially with regard to opposition in Uganda.
I think for me, the starting point is on the time. Because the issues are not actually the biggest challenge that we've had. Because over time, I think over the past 3 decades, we've been having concrete constitutional and even electoral reform proposals which have been coming through. These are well documented. If you refer back to the Citizens Compact for free and fair elections, the process which I actively took part in terms of organizing, but also Dr. Miriam Matembe was actually a part of that, starting from the period 2011 up to 2015, in the build up to the 2016 elections. That compact is really, really comprehensive on the issues, on the reforms. And if I were asked to go and amend the constitution, I would not even waste any time. I would just go pick the compact, and then I would go and enact what is in that compact. So in terms of the issues, I think we have a comprehensive list of issues that can inform a constitutional reform process.
Do you mind taking us through those?
There are quite a number which have been emerging over time, which need to be taken consideration of. There are issues to do with the AI, that is artificial intelligence. We've had in the past weeks, of course, the West has really taken lead in terms of trying to shape the conversation around how do we deal with AI. But there are also areas to do with innovations or developments in medicine, modern medicine. There are things to do with organ transplant and things like that, which are not catered for by our constitution. But in terms of the others, especially that border how we are governed, how elections are managed, we have quite a list of those.
Yeah.
If I may just refer back to the Citizens Compact for free and fair elections, we had issues to do with demarcation of electoral boundaries. We've had the challenge of gerrymandering, in that in the build-up to every election, we create new constituencies, we are creating new districts, we are creating new polling areas. And with that, you find that the collection and collation of even results from those areas becomes problematic. And that is where sometimes we get a number of contentions that result into election petitions. There are issues to do with how the commissioner or even the commissioners of the Electoral Commission are appointed.
That's right.
There's a big challenge there, because if you have the incumbent choosing, having all the discretion to choose who becomes the commissioner and the other commissioners of elections, clearly they are going to determine that election in the incumbent's favor. And I think there's a problem there. So that has to be worked on. There are issues to do with time. I spoke about time. The the Supreme Court was very elaborate in terms of how much time needs to be considered before constitutional and electoral reforms are dealt with. I think it gave a time frame of 2 years. As we speak, we have already passed that time.
That has elapsed.
We're already out of time. And the biggest challenge we have always had in the build-up to in relation to reforms of elections, electoral reforms, and even constitutional reforms, the excuse that has always been given by Parliament is the lack of time. I remember vividly well when we worked, said which Dr. Matembe was chairing, even before the 2011 elections. I think between sorry, not 2011. Just in the post 2011, just before the 2011 elections, we had the Sarah Handbook, okay, which was proposing a range of proposals that I think a bill was presented, and then we were told there was no time. Fast forward, we went into the Citizens Compact, which was really comprehensive. It was tabled in Parliament. It went through all the different channels, Minister of Justice, Attorney General, and again the Speaker. Then it was Rebecca Kadaga also gave the excuse of time, that they didn't have time to enact all these reforms. Now, fast forward, the Niwagava Bill in 2019, you remember it, so it was also very elaborate, I think, in terms of the issues that have to be covered. Again, we were told there was no time to discuss and even deliberate on the bill. So right now, we are also at a point whereby, yes, I've been hearing Chairman Mao talking about a process that is in the offing. We have also had, of course, from the Law Reform Commission, that they are receiving a litany of proposals, reform proposals. But I'm just wondering, at what point is the citizen going to get involved in this process? Because this constitution is not being made for Chairman Mao or for the Law Reform Commission or the people that appoint the Law Reform Commission and Chairman Mao. This constitution is being made for us as Ugandan citizens. So at what point does the citizen get involved in this process? Again, I see us being stampeded. Already we can see campaigns have actually started. If you've been following what is going on across the country, of course you've followed, I'm sure, closely the MK project. Right now, most recently, NUP had also started traversing the country. Recently, they launched their new offices. All that is part of the campaign process. The president, I think for him, he never ceases to campaign. He has been, so the campaign has actually been going on. So we are already, the EC actually launched, I think, a roadmap just the other day.
Launched,
so clearly, elections, campaigns have started. So the question is, at what point are we going to have constitutional reforms enacted? Are we going to have concrete reforms, or again, we are going to do what we call ticking boxes, just to play to the gallery and create an impression that we are interested in the reform process?
All right. Dr. Miriam Matembe, listening to Job Kaije there, you can see clearly, as a country, we are out of time, and any attempt to drum the beats of constitutional reforms, electoral reforms, is more like a wastage of time. it won't happen, at least within the time frame that it's supposed to happen. But even when it does, or should it happen, there's a possibility of rolling out omnibus legislation, which could also be very dangerous, that some of these laws could be actually enacted and passed without necessary consultation, especially of the citizens, as Job Kaija alludes to. But you also give us your personal overview of the political space right now. How do you see things?
Well, for me, I agree with Kaija, what he's saying. Because what he's telling us here, when we came out with the Citizens Compact, we were all there.
That's
and we
right.
traversed the whole country. Civil society with some politicians were together with some of the political parties. They used to even to strip us naked. The government people used to beat us as we went around until we had to go to the Minister of Internal Affairs and said, look here, we cannot take this any longer. We must teach our people. Because it was to do with mobilizing people to really get interested in the governance of their country. Because they were like lay back. After, you know, the country had gone into multi-party political system, people used to know movement, they would run there. They had laid back as if they have nothing to do with the governance of this country. And so we went. We started teaching them, explaining to them, and they gave their views. They gave their views after they had seen the information we were giving them. We wrote this citizen, and we brought it to Parliament. He has talked about all that.
That's right.
Do you know what happened? The only reform, the only change that happened, because we are crying out for an independent electoral commission, the only reform which they made was adding the word independent. Because original, the electoral commission did not have the word independent. They put the word independent, like they are making people fools. So from that time, so much has been continuing. Let me tell you, just like Martin Luther King Jr. said, that if you can't fly, at least run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But at least continue moving.
Okay.
We Ugandans here, who really love our country, and who see it going very bad. This time, the situation is actually so bad. It is like we are in a ship. We are like the word of God says, a sheep without shepherd. I am telling you in Uganda now, it is to whom it may concern. We are lost. I don't know why Ugandans don't see this. And that's the reason for us, we shall continue crawling, even if we crawl. But at least at one day, they will say no. Because winners never quit. That's the only reason why we are continuing to push on, to crawl. But otherwise, really, it is very, very clear for me to tell you that this current government, to do with the constitutional reform or electoral reform, you are joking. They see us, we are joking, but for us, we can't stop. We shall continue moving. But I want us to separate what we call constitutional reform or constitutional amendments or something from electoral reforms. You see, a constitution, and I sit here as one of those people, the 21-member commission, who traversed the whole country of Uganda and got Uganda's views. For the first time, Uganda had, at least you would call, consensus. Or at least they all had an opportunity to create a Uganda which they wanted. Through that process. Anybody who critiques that process, that it did nothing or whatever, me, as a person who still lives, I don't know how many, even Kayihura is still living. There is Professor Otim. I don't know how many of us are still living. At least we know, hey, Odochi, you should bring Justice Odochi here and talk to people. At least we know for the first time Ugandans, with all the vigor, with all the passion, with all, sat and said, let us create our own Uganda and give it the way it should be governed. And eventually, of course, the CA, and we came out with this constitution. Usually, constitutions are not just subject to amendment every day, and they are not subject to review. Even that review which took place after 5 years. Yes, no problem. A constitution should be reviewed, a constitution should be amended, because the circumstances may change at that time. But there must be fundamental principles which govern this constitution, that the changing comes into the lower provisions like that. And therefore, constitutional reform and review should not take place all the time. And they don't need to get all Ugandans to participate, because they did. And then we had another review whose major objective actually was to destroy our constitution and create a dictatorship and prevent peaceful change of government. That was the main reason really why they put that review. But now, constitution, they should, for me, I do believe that when this government is off, and it will go, there will be a need to review that constitution. It may not need to go to all Ugandans, but committee of experts. I mean, the constitution of Kenya, they called the experts. Because we had worked on it, and afterwards it had stalled, then eventually they called the committee of experts. I know our same paper was part of them, and they looked at, they reviewed, they studied, and the constitution passed. Therefore, the review of our constitution, for me, I think will take place when this government goes. Because as long as it is here, and as long with all in the dead institutions, like Parliament has no power, it cannot change anything. All the power belongs to one person, and therefore, and since he wants to remain in power forever, I don't see him making a constitution that will make Uganda a good democratic country. But for the electoral reforms, because since elections are held all the time, and they are continuous, then
both local
so
and
the reforms,
national level.
The reforms are really necessary to carry them out. But now, for me, one thing I want, which doesn't even need a constitution, this whole thing of dividing Uganda into small tribes and ethnicities in terms of constituencies, and finishing all the money in this country. When I was still a leader, to make a constituency was not the job of the president. To make a district was not the job of the president. There were laws which said that when an area comes to this amount of people and this level of development, it will be a city, or it will be a town, or it will be a constituency. And this was the role of the Minister of Local Government, because he would be the one governing the local whatever government, and therefore he would know the amount of these people, this forms a constituency. And to declare district, there are certain, you see, like in church, in our Anglican church, to give you a bishop, there are qualities and qualifications and criteria which must be fulfilled for you to give a bishop, and that will be very good. But here in Uganda, they wake up because they want to get votes from that area. That becomes a constituency, that becomes a district, that becomes whatever. And the whole thing is just, I don't know, at times I lose words. But it is just like we are in a mess. And what worries me is that Ugandans don't see it like some of us see it.
But Ugandans maybe see what is happening around them, but perhaps are more concerned about other aspects of ensuring their own survival, to be as concerned as any other person might want them to be concerned.
You know, Chair, the Bible says they have eyes,
but they don't see.
They have ears, but for us, we tell them, we who see.
I am increasingly at pains as a moderator this whole week. Yesterday, I was speaking to a set of politicians, Ssemujju Ibrahim Nganda, Waiso Mfulbiro, and Brandon Kintu, NOP, NRM, and Katonga faction of FDC. But what was very poignant was the fact that Ssemujju said that we can discuss so much about Uganda, but that should only happen after President Yoweri Museveni is out of power. And that completely knocked me off, because I was like, then why should I be in position to ask the fundamental questions? But my job is exactly that. Despite the musings of the politicians and the fact that President Yoweri Museveni could be fundamentally the problem for Uganda, we need to be able to excavate those other aspects of us as a people that can take us forward. You spoke about the fact that Uganda has been broken into so many pieces based on ethnicity and political inclination. It's an attempt to reorganize, according to some people, in order to ensure that everyone is represented, because at the end of the day, power belongs to the people.
When did it belong to the people? Which people in Uganda decide? I mean, these statements are there.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm talking to people who know what is going on.
Okay.
By the constitution, power belongs to the people. But which people? Which people now? One person. Because, for instance, if you know, people blame these party, the parties. They blame them that they are not organized, they can't do anything. How can they organize when they are not allowed to organize? How can they build parties when they are not allowed to build? When there must be only one view that must prevail. You know, I'm not saying, people say why Museveni, we hate Museveni, we do what? But President Museveni himself talks and says, you people, I did not come to serve you. He says all these words. Recently, he said something which shocked me. And I said, but God is good. He makes the president reveal his inner heart to Ugandans. You know?
What did he say?
Knowing it. I saw him saying that he's the one who sent the Bararo to go to Acholi land and take it. Didn't you hear him? I said, hey, wait a minute. You mean you can say this? Imagine.
He has also told them, especially those that don't have fenced land, to vacate.
No, he has told him to fence it.
Now, fence land of who? I'm not being tribalistic. You people, I'm never tribalistic. I'm not a ethnicity. I'm a Ugandan. I want united Uganda.
Okay.
But by the way, let me ask, who is Bararo? In the country, in Uganda, is there a tribe called Bararo? Is even there an
Bararo is
called Bararo? What is Bararo? Who is Bararo?
An activity that is undertaken by a specific set of people, usually, and those are referred to by others who are not actually engaged in that activity.
So,
no, it's like saying carpenters.
When you're referring to
carpenters, not an ethnicity. Carpenters, they're just doing something.
No. You describe. Is that in English? You mean
no,
you read the word Bararo?
No.
I want what the word Bararo means.
Herdsmen.
So that we see who, because who are Bararo? I want to ask, are those people in Teso who have cows called Bararo? Are they called Bararo? Because in Teso, by the way, when I was doing a constitution in Teso, when I reached Teso, they told us, for us, we shall never unite with Karamoja because they stole all our cows. Now I want to ask, be specific, be honest. Are the Bateso who have cows Bararo? Are the Karamajongo who have cows called Bararo? Are those people called Bararo? Why I'm asking, I'm saying, who is Bararo? Bararo must have origin. Where are they coming from? Where are the Bararo coming from to go and invade Acholi land and take it? And they say, in fact, I sent them there. And by the way, they are not only there. You go to this Ruwero, go everywhere. Who are the Bararo? Where do they belong to? Why should they go and take people's land?
Okay, that's a question, of course, that is being addressed, and I'm sure all stakeholders who are involved in that will be able to give us some sort of direction on the way forward. The president has also spoken what he thinks.
I was bringing in, by the way, because of connecting
Yeah, that's right. Let's stick to the issue of, I wanted us to excavate whatever positives can come out of decentralization. Attempts at decentralization are should not be entirely seen as a political gimmick, one that is aimed at ensuring there is more support for any one political party. There are experts who have reasoned that if you cluster communities so that they are able to better attend to the issues of the day within their environment, it's much easier. If, for example, you have a set of, we've seen Wakiso being consistently being, chopped from itself. And you would assume, for example, that if there were problems of access to basic services, then there is a possibility that if aspects like corruption are dealt with, the kind of apathy on the part of some people in the public services can actually reach people within the decentralization mechanism. It's a tough question. It's also a tough reality. Kenya has attempted it. Can't we?
Well, for me, the question I would ask is, what are we calling basic services? Basic services are health,
yep,
education, water, etc. And infrastructure. Okay. So my question is, I come from Hoima, where also Balalo have. but of course, starting from Kivoga up to one of the most striking things for me, about 15 or so years back, I think between 15 and 20 years back, when we had just received really the hype around oil, was when we went for a function in a place called Ingwedo in Bulisa district, closer to the lake. And Lake Albert, yes. Yeah. And we expected to find that place is usually originally inhabited by Bagungu, Luls, etc. And then when we went there for this function, we found Valalo.
He had invaded
with guns, interestingly.
That's how.
And so for me, I got so puzzled. Still a young man, I think I was either getting out of high school or something like that. So I didn't even understand what was going on. So the image of those people is still so vivid in my head.
That's right.
I kept wondering for a very long time, but why are these people here? As far as I know, this place is inhabited by Bagungu, Luls, and at the minimum Banyoro, who are closer to those areas. But why are these people here? Because I expect them to be coming from elsewhere. But anyway, that's not a question to answer today, because I think it has been answered over time why they were there or why they are still there. We've seen what has happened to the land in that area. The unfortunate thing is that as these people move to most of these locations, the challenges you're having right now in northern Uganda are the same challenges that are in all these areas. This challenge is not unique to northern Uganda. The only thing I think is that northern Uganda has been so proactive, but also in Bunyoro you've had these issues have been there for quite some time. But also I think because in northern Uganda the land tenure system is a bit different. And so now when the president gets up and says if you don't have fenced land, you leave, within 3 weeks, essentially he has given them 3 weeks to fence off that land. So the question is, how do you fence off
in other words,
land of that land tenure system?
To lay more claim to land.
I mean, clearly, if I were the one, even if he doesn't tell it to me, and I have 1,000 heads of cattle, and I have my 10 square miles, and you say within 3 weeks, if you've not fenced off your land, you should vacate, then I'll clearly go and fence off the land. Because number one, I have the financial muscle to fence it off, but also number two, I have been given time to actually do that. But back to the question of decentralization, the question I ask is, in order for you to give me these basic services, in order for you to give me a road to my place in Kiriangobe where I come from, do you need to give me new political leaders? Must you break down my region, my district, let's say Hoima, because now there are so many constituencies that have been created there. Dr. Matembe clearly explained that in order for you to create a district or a new political area, there are certain things that must be in place, okay? Yes, for Hoima we can argue that there's an airport, there's I don't know, oil which is coming up, etc. But the question is, are we following the standards that must be followed in order to create these new political areas? But I think the fundamental question that I'm asking, in order for you to give me a road that takes me up to my house in Kiriangobe, do you need to create a list of political leaders along that road? What role do they have to play then? And what are they doing? If we are to go back to the actual, if we are to go back to value for money, we have, right now Parliament is 500 MPs. Are we saying that there's better legislation now? Because
Well,
what is the
yeah.
role of parliamentarians? Is legislation,
Okay.
oversight, representation. Are we saying there's better representation at the moment? Is there better legislation? Is there better oversight?
All right, you've preempted the discussion as I was due to introduce the politics of numbers and whether we need to look at reorganizing that particular landscape in order to shape the politics going forward. Time now for a short break. It's bottom of the hour of 8. We shall be back and continue with the debate on constitutional as well as electoral reforms ahead of 2026. Do stay with us.
You're watching Morning at NTV.
All right, you can always be rest assured debate off air can continue and be as lively as it can be any one time when you are seated with Dr. Miriam Matembe and of course Job Kaija. We are talking constitutional and electoral reforms ahead of 2026. Some reforms have been touted as the precursor for the kind of political landscape that Uganda needs in order to correct some of the governance challenges that we have faced over the years. But the pace of legislation, the pace of civic education, especially for the citizens out there, is not commensurate with the need. And that is also an aspect that has been cited as of grave challenge. Let me return to my guests in studio, Dr. Miriam Matembe. She's a veteran and seasoned political commentator and politician. I'm also joined by Job Kaija, a governance expert, who are helping us understand these particular issues. Dr. Job Kaija had given us an overview on decentralization and why it's a non-starter to want to tell somebody that in order for them to get a road to their area, you have to create a new constituency and a whole set of leaders for that. But you had a view on this particular issue. Should it be improved, or must we completely abandon decentralization as rolled out by the National Resistance Movement?
Actually, decentralization is something which was introduced right from the Constitution, even when we were traversing the whole country. And as a commissioner, I'll tell you why we boiled down onto decentralization. We were traversing the whole country, and we are talking, the Baganda were saying they want federal. And they are saying federal, if every area like is federal, then we can do better, link with one another, but do better because we shall be close, you know, in a federation.
It's easier to reach consensus
but
when
what
you're working
happened,
with like-minded
but
people.
what we saw, the federal was being demanded by only the central region. There was nobody demanding federal. Now, when we reached Mbari, the people of Mbari talked about federal. We were very surprised. We said, why is Mbari asking for federal? And you know what they told us is what made us really see decentralization is good and necessary. They said, we have our coffee. We plant our coffee. It is ours. But now, this coffee, all of it goes to the center, and they enjoy all the resources, and we as people of Mbare, what do we enjoy from our coffee and our resources? We said, wait a minute, you know, we need this, instead of crying out for federal, we need decentralization, because what we saw in the Mbare question was if services are decentralized, leadership is decentralized, and is given power and authority to manage that area, to manage, lead, manage the resources, control the resources, and they would only be giving the center some kind of resources, but they also have their resources from their products, from their work.
That's
You
right.
get it?
And greater autonomy.
Yes, so it was autonomy closer to the people, and when there is greater autonomy and financial independence and resources, then they would manage their own facilities, the education, the health, everything. And that's how we perceived the type of decentralization which we wanted to be in Uganda, where the leadership there is really independent. I mean, if you go to these states which have federal, which have federal,
look at Nigeria.
you see they are Nigeria. They are independent, they do their things and they develop. So we are looking at, since here federation, you can't federate with the whole nation federates with one center, we said decentralization would be so good, would solve that problem. But before you go into even distributing this thing into smallest units, was it genuine decentralization? There was no genuine decentralization where you leave people to choose their leader, to manage their resources, to do. But now,
so essentially what you're saying, Doctor,
decentralization has no authority, has no resources, has no power, all they have is leadership, political leadership that consumes everything that they would be using themselves.
Okay.
No I don't call this decentralization.
Districtization.
The one we wanted people to get and manage their resources and services. They wouldn't be crying to, we don't have a hospital, our hospital is not there. They would be the one managing and equipping it, and
How is Kenya's devolution question, or how is devolution rolling out? Because it's pretty much decentralization, but I think in a more, I don't know whether the space within which leaders are allowed to act is larger than for the sake of decentralization, because here the districts are a little bit smaller. Just explain the devolution aspect in Kenya.
I think for me, even without going to the devolution, to explaining the devolution in Kenya, because I may not understand their model so well,
okay,
I need to say that from what Dr. Matembe is saying, and perhaps what is in Kenya, there's a question of discipline and the culture that you have in place. Because, I mean, on paper, decentralization is such a good model.
Yes.
But when you get down to
the
do
intentions,
when you politicize it, you get what we have at the moment, which is just what you'd call districtization. And let me actually call it, what we are doing is gerrymandering. Because this breakdown of districts, creation of cities, creation of constituencies, if you ask the question about the timing, when does this usually happen? It is usually in the build-up to an election. And we do it basically to try and increase the political strength of a certain political group in this country. And I think for me that is the unfortunate thing that we have. If we really followed the decentralization that we have on paper to the letter, would be where Dr. Matembe and the colleagues saw us, how long ago? 30 years back? Almost 30 years back. Where they projected we would be today is where we would be. But unfortunately, I think we are quite a number of steps backwards. If you go down and you try to look at health centers, most recently you remember when the Minister for, is it ICT? Honorable Chris Baryomonsi got a problem in Kanungu. He could not even get a competent health center or even an ambulance to take care of him in his own district. So I think that is the crisis that we have of decentralization. That the model is good on paper. It was set up to deliver optimal results, but at the moment what we are getting is a raw deal.
Okay. In fact, if I can just tell you to compare.
Please do.
I was a member of parliament of Mbarara district. By then, Mbarara district had, was it 9 counties plus municipality. In total, there were 49 sub-counties where I was a member of parliament. Right now, there are 7 districts in that district of Mbarara, because every county has become a district. But I want to ask you, if you ask some people, even I've left the parliament 19 years now, when you go there, some people say, oh, Matembe is our member of parliament, the woman member of parliament. If you ask the people in the constituency, who is your woman member of parliament, and yet it is just one county, even if you ask, you know nobody. Who is a woman member of parliament from Mbarara? You can't mention any. And yet, you say you are decentralizing to make more effectiveness. And yet, I appear to have been more effective in the 49 sub-counties than the now 7 members of parliament, women members of parliament. You see, so you see now, does that called division, I don't call it decentralization, gerrymandering and divisionalism and sort of tribalizing the thing. You find only now it must be this clan has a constituency, the other clan has a constituency. Do you think that makes effective performance? Really, to be honest.
It of course wouldn't make for effective performance. I hope the powers that be are looking into improving and of course changing that narrative for the better. Now let's drive further and look at the possibilities that could come. The accusation against the militarization of the Uganda police is one of the aspects that have consistently appeared as one that need to be addressed, especially in the run-up to the elections. I cannot characterize the Uganda police force as a military force. The force word still remains there. Others have called for it to be renamed the Uganda Police Service so that it can look and sound a service other than a force. Sometimes people say the police acts the way it does because they understand what they are called. They are a force. Do you see a possibility of that slowly being, or rather the police being rid of the military aspect? Because when you see generals of the army being appointed as officers in the force, then it completely topples whatever reforms anybody wants for that particular sector.
I think for me there are two aspects in terms of reform. One is of course at a constitutional level, and that is the presence of the military in parliament. It's, it's a fundamental mistake that the Dr. Matembe has made.
Yeah, you'll talk about it.
You'll talk about it and tell us why.
Yes.
But we have seen how this has actually been a problem for us. And the way the military actually gets involved in our, even in parliamentary business. You remember the discussion around the presidential age limit and how SFC basically just raided parliament and caused a crisis, which I think has not happened south of the Sahara in ages.
Yeah.
Now, when you leave that, of course, you go to the conduct. Well, we know it for a fact that some of us even have relatives that are soldiers who are in police. Okay? We know it for a fact that in some instances we've read reports, Human Rights Commission reports, whereby the training that has been offered to the police on certain instances has actually been military training. We know it for a fact that we have had policemen, not policemen, but the police, of course, which has soldiers in it, managing public order and using military means.
You've seen soldiers dressed as policemen.
Yes, we have seen soldiers dressed as policemen, but we have also seen soldiers driving police vehicles. Okay, if you watched,
all right,
if you watch the scenes of the protests of 2020, where we had, I think we lost over 50-something lives. So, and if you watch some of those scenes, you could see that soldiers were actually just shooting. Okay, targeted shooting, children, etc. And I think that has created a problem for us. Police can reform.
Don't act like, shouldn't act like that.
Yes, if you talk to police, by the way, the people, some of the police officers will actually tell you the challenges that we have been encircled by some of these soldiers.
That
sums
sums it up. They've been encircled.
Yeah.
In a minute, Dr. Miriam Matembe, and because of the time dividend that I have, why did you elect that the military should be in parliament?
Good. You know, people blame us when our constitution became abused and killed, murdered. People started blaming us. But everything that we put there came as a result of our history, and we were aiming at correcting it. Now, we said that these army people, don't know things which are happening in the leadership in the country. All they know is in their army.
The barracks.
And because they don't know what goes on in these areas of governance, for them, they come and overthrow. Now we said, since now this is a movement government where everybody is, let us have the military also represented there, so that they would sit there and see and also participate and debate and see decisions, why take decisions of governance are like this, what is going on, so that they can also go and brief their army when army is disturbed and so
All
on.
right.
No, now I want to finish it. So when we went to multi-party political system, they should not have gone into parliament. I told you that the constitution is can be adjusted according to the environment. So we were one,
At that
speaking
point,
as one.
that should
Now,
have been-
when they divided and became political parties, the army was supposed to leave parliament because it can't belong to any party. You see,
That is very
but
clear.
they kept it there.
We've now understood
Very
a
wrongly.
very fundamental aspect
Yes.
of the military's intervention
It was
in
good.
our political affairs. That will do it for this Kickstarter discussion. Dr. Miriam Matembe, many thanks for your time. We are emboldened by the submission and perspective that you have offered. Many thanks to you too. Job Kija, for that very interesting take on matters of decentralization, constitutional as well as electoral reform. Now, there is an issue that has also been making headlines in the country. The fact that firewood for the refugees